out there, your husband's position, your husband himself. I don't know that anybody has the silver bullet kind of answer.
Right.
But I think it lends itself to what we're talking about, which ultimately, one thing when we talk about the eschatological man that I think is helpful, because more and more we look at we look at the world and we see the problems. We have lots of people that don't have any kind of theological grounding. They don't have any kind of spirituality or faith that reminds them that no matter how hard we fight for original man or eschatological man, no matter how much it may actually be present, this is, I gotta say this, I'm the Lutheran, right? Like we are hopelessly stuck in this
That's right.
mess. Like
Yeah.
we are mired in so much. If
Yeah.
I was off air, I would probably use some words that I learned in New York, but
Right. That's right.
It's just so hopelessly terrible in some ways.
Yep.
As good as creation is, as good as bodies are, and people are, and men and women, as much as we should fight for the right, because Jesus came, he died, he rose in time, and so we have this hope now in the present. Ultimately, it is still on the way.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not.
That's so
here.
important.
And if you ever try to fight for good, believing that this is all there is,
Right.
you will destroy it.
That's right. That's right. It's crucial to understand that the movement, how we get from historical man to eschatological man, is an act of grace. It's something that God does. Like we don't, any attempt that we make at trying to bring about the kingdom of God through our own efforts, like bootstrapping ourselves up, is a hopeless mistake.
Well,
it's
not only that,
yeah.
in time, but that ultimately there is a day appointed when it will be completed.
That's right. It's something that
Right,
God
so,
does. Yeah.
I am sure of this, that
Yeah.
my God will bring to completion the work that he began in you at the day of our Lord Jesus.
That's right.
Not tomorrow, not next week, not next year, not if we get all our ducks in a row, not
Yeah.
if we have the right policies, not if we, like, in some sense, we are inevitably going to overcorrect and
Right.
make different problems, and so.
That's right. That's
But
right.
so if we want to embody,
Yeah.
pardon the pun, Christ, we have to be in this ongoing work of meeting people in the new problems,
That's
whatever
right.
they may be.
Yeah,
Those are opportunities to display his love and service.
All three layers, we're talking about them in layers, and I mean the advantage, it's obvious that the reason for the technical language is in order to kind of unfold the different layers and explore them one at a time, which makes it actually easier to kind of think through. But it's important to understand that all three layers are happening always at the same time. Like that's, all three of those layers are part of my experience of myself and my understanding of myself. I am who God created me to be from the beginning. That's true. I'm also a man who is affected by sin, and I live through and is experiencing this disintegration. That's also true. And so the eschatological man is an object of my hope. It's not something that I'm going to I can't escape the historical context. I'm never going to achieve through my efforts and leave behind the historical element and move to the eschatological perfection. That's never going to happen because I'm still a historical person. And so I look for the day when God brings to completion his good work. And that hope and that vision and that hope for the future allows me to make sense of what's wrong now and not to be so burdened and crushed by it that I can't live the gospel in my historical context. So even if I'll never overcome sin definitively by my own efforts, I also don't, that's not a message that brings me to despair, right? I can rely on the grace of Christ.
People tend to think that, right? So,
yeah,
if
you can't give them a solution, then
not just a solution, but for example, I'm Lutheran. We have this hymnal that actually that hymnal right there. It says the Lutheran hymnal on the wall. Okay, page 5 and 15. Those are the services that people used for a good, solid generation or two or three, possibly. And in the one service where there's the communion service, where they
Mhm.
have a confession and absolution as part of the service, the corporate confession part starts, I, a poor, miserable sinner.
Yeah, we have
You know,
through my fault, through my most grievous fault.
Yeah, we have a service that includes
Yeah,
that
yeah.
also. I, a poor, miserable sinner. I can't, I'm terrible, I'm awful. There's been a movement, I guess, in our culture, and of course that's affected the church, where people are like, I don't wanna say that stuff because it's bad
Yeah.
for my self-esteem, it's bad for whatever. But, you know, it dawns on me sitting here next to someone who's in recovery, right, and who coaches people in recovery, isn't that actually the key to unlocking the hope of the eschatological? Right, so like embracing this idea that I am bound.
Right. And this dichotomy that we live in, of, you know, like you're saying, we are good, we're created by God, we're good, we're in His image, but we also are fallen and broken, and at the same time, but we have this hope in God that
At
we
the
can
same
restore
time.
at the same time.
Mhm.
But and it reminds me, kind of another way to see it is how some of the fathers of the church speak of it as far as the original historical and eschatological. We were created, originally, according to some of the fathers of the church, we were created originally in God's image and likeness, and now in the historical, we're still created in His image. Even the worst people on the earth, every single person has the image of God, which is that the will, the intellect, the capacity to love, the freedom, but the likeness is what we lost through the fall. So now we don't have the likeness of God. We're not as humble as Him. We're not as kind as Him. We don't have the love. We don't have those attributes of God that we were destined and we were created for originally. So we were created in the image and likeness of God. We've lost that now. We have the image still, so we're still good, and we're still in some ways like God, but we've lost the qualities. So we need to be more Christ-like. And over time, we gradually, through the grace of the Holy Spirit that we receive through the church, and from God, we gradually attain the likeness back and become more and more into His image through sanctifying grace. We become more into His image, and that's the hope we look for, which won't be completed here, but eschatological man, looking forward, there is hope, because one day we will be perfected in heaven forever. So at this point, we're working it out. We're relying on the grace to restore the likeness and to become more like God, while yet we do remain good, because we are created in God's image.
That's, sorry, go ahead, please.
I figured maybe a statement from a woman could just put
No,
to
please,
bed.
please,
Yeah,
to
do
bed
it.
please do, yeah.
But the person who came to mind, her name is Saint Therese of Lisieux, France, and she's a canonized saint who died in her like mid-20s. And one of the gifts that she's been to the church and that God has used her was that message that God spoke to us of our littleness, or sometimes the littleness, and that's just kind of what I'm hearing by listening, when I'm listening to Chris and Gary and Pastor Emil, just going back and forth, reconciling that we're both fallen yet good. She would say, it's my littleness, and when she's saying that, she's kind of recognizing her brokenness, her weakness as a human being. However, it's, of course, from her standpoint, she's seeing it for what it is. Realistically, she's not like, it's not rosy colored glasses that she's seeing herself. She is being raw, she's being honest when she is recognizing, when I see myself and me and the Lord, I'm so little. Like, so she'll use descriptions such as flowers. She'll describe that some people in the church, I mean, they're magnificent, they're powerful, I mean, they're roses, and I'm just a daisy. She would just say, like, I'm
just
a
a
daisy.
little tiny flower.
But she would
in the
field,
field,
that that's just who she is. That's how God made her. She's not envious. She's not trying to be the rose. She's complacent of just recognizing, I'm a daisy. This is how the Lord made me, and she saw it as an opportunity of when she could kind of when I'm thinking of people maybe in recovery, when they can be that naked and honest of, this is really who I am, both with the broken self, with the awesome parts of myself, that's where she could see how much more like the Lord will just come down here and just be like, I'm gonna carry you up to heaven, okay? Like, I love you so much. Because she just had that faith and trust that she knew that she couldn't do it, but she knew the love of the Lord, and she knew the Lord could do it. So maybe even just looking at this same concept through even the kind of that analogy. You can be an eagle. That's another analogy she used. You can be an eagle, or you can be a small bird. You know. Anyways, hopefully.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. I mean, I think to go back, and maybe this is the conundrum. Like, how am I a son of God and sinner and love God, but also condemned? Both of these things are happening, right? And how do I handle that? And to kind of go back to, Gary talked about these relations, that the intimacy of the relationships are broken, and my intimacy of my relationship with God. Well, because of my sin, I break my relationship with God. I've lost intimacy with God. I've kind of gone my own way, right? But now, in the historical context, because I have this awfulness in me, right, which I cannot bootstrap myself out of. I can't earn salvation, right? I can't. There's no matter how many times I go to church or how often I pray, I can't just cast this off. But I'm called to participate in my intimacy with God. Well, that takes a new shape now. Now, God still wants to have intimacy with me. His plan hasn't changed because I failed or because we have failed. And so, what shape does my intimacy with God have to take? Completely transparent about my sinfulness.
Right.
Completely openness. Lord, I'm a sinner. Lord, I cannot continue without you. I'm absolutely dependent on your love and your grace. And I give you praise, and I thank you for your kindness to me, that you've looked down on me, even as unworthy as I am, right? And so as soon as we open up in reality that brokenness and that sinfulness that we have, like in recovery, you have to say it, right? You have to say it. You have to say, I failed in this way. And then what has happened by opening that up and by being honest about it and by calling it by name, I'm actually taking the first step with God, by God's grace, to intimacy with him, right?
And we're called.
He sees my sin. He knows that I'm a sinner. That's what we talk about. That's now part of the relationship. And all of a sudden, by the miracle of grace, the fact that sin is part of my life, when I share that with Christ, that just becomes now, the cross becomes now the avenue by which in this context, I participate in my intimacy with God.
Yeah, and we're called to this great intimacy with God. And you reminded me of what you had said about shame. She had something about shame you said, and it ties in because, the greatest barrier of a true intimacy between two people is shame. So if you feel shame, you're not going to feel
like you're hiding.
You're hiding. So you don't feel like if you really, if the other person really saw you, who you are on the inside, that they would reject you. So you hide back, you close off. And you see that in the context of, original, historical, eschatological. So historical, original man, we were naked and without shame. So we didn't have that shame to begin with. So we were able to totally be connected to God, to ourselves, and to other people. But with the entrance of sin comes the shame and the breakdown of the intimacy. So now you've got this shame. They're hiding. They're covering themselves behind the bush or whatever. So moving into historical, that's the place we're in now, and we have this shame. And in order to restore the communion and that union, that intimacy that we're called to with God, with ourselves and with other people, we've got to deal with the shame. And that becomes a huge thing in recovery, of doing your shame work, because everybody struggles with shame to a degree, according to Brene Brown, the biggest researcher of shame in the world. And she says every single person, every one of them, struggles with shame to a degree. Some of us greater than others. But when an addiction is really huge, shame is one of the biggest things. We all have it in addiction, and it's actually like a rocket fuel for addiction. Addiction grows and thrives when there's a lot of shame present. When you deal with shame, the addiction gets weaker. So that's a big part of it for us. It ties into this whole...
Think about that. I think about somebody who's struggling with any kind of temptation. You don't tell your friends that you're tempted, right? You don't let people, you don't tell your wife, the people that you have intimate relationship, you don't tell them about that stuff, right? It's hard. But how much more intimate is the relationship when you say, I really am struggling with this thing, whatever it is. And, you saying it, you're actually restoring intimacy, actually, conversely, and it's the opposite of what you want to do, right? But
and I think the church, a lot of what we're seeing today, I think we talked a little bit about this before we sat down, Chris, is, we're seeing a lot of relatively conservative Christians trying to push back against what they see, sort of the eroding of family values, morals, Christian doctrine and beliefs about sexuality and family and gender and all that kind of stuff. But what I think we're failing to recognize is that we are actually part of this crisis, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right? We created it for this very reason. There's this book, used to have it on here. Maybe it's in my office. It's by Carl Medeiros. It's called Speaking of Jesus, The Art of Non-Evangelism, I believe is the subtitle. And here's a guy who was a missionary in the Middle East in very heavily Muslim countries, very hostile to Christianity. And, he was a missionary, right? He comes back to the States and he's in some very liberal, progressive cities. And he tells this story about meeting a woman who owned the bookstore where he was writing his sermon every week. And she said, "Oh, you're a pastor, you write your sermon. I used to go to church too, right? And used to teach Sunday school every week." And now she's like this LGBT activist, out and proud, leading things in the community. And she said, "Well, here's my story. I went to my pastor and I said, I struggle with same-sex attraction." And he stood up and pointed at the door and said, "Get out of here.
Right.
Don't you ever set foot in this building again." And so how awful is the theology?
That's right.
Right, because he missed the fact that it's okay to struggle, right? He created shame. He reinforced the shame. He added to the shame.
You should be ashamed of yourself.
You should be ashamed of yourself.
Right, yeah.
In fact, I'm ashamed to know you now. Can you please get away from me so I don't have to deal with what people might say about me if I'm a pastor of a person who struggles with same-sex attraction.
Right.
So we don't even have, actually, I've met some gay Catholics that actually understand this better than most people in the LGBT community. They're actually, there's some resources you guys have. We maybe can talk about that at some point.
Yeah.
But
that's right. But I don't want to take too much credit because that same struggle is in our communion too. Like it's
everywhere.
It's everywhere. And and it's very difficult to be able to, someone who's experiencing same-sex attraction, to be able to identify that as a problem or a disorder or something that's not in itself good, and at the same time recognize that this person is overcoming shame and is moving in the direction of intimacy with Christ and His church, and to be able to affirm and love that person who is making known their weaknesses, or they're making known, to be able to do both of those at the same time is extremely difficult. It's difficult pastorally. Anyone who's in ministry, it's really hard to. We keep talking about balancing that. Yeah. It's really hard to do. But I think that understanding, original man, eschatological man, historical man, understanding that there are these layers and why they are these layers, it helps you to navigate that. Someone comes into your office and says, I'm struggling. It's like, how beautiful that you would say that. Like, how beautiful that you would open your heart about this.
Courage.
And what courage that takes, and what a grace that God has brought you to this place to just talk about it. And then, and then to work with and walk with and accompany that person who's in that situation to help them, maybe we don't have false hope that they're going to overcome this experience or something, but at least help them to live as in as rich and healthy and free way as they can without falling into the pitfalls of a sinful lifestyle or something like that. And so these technical terms all of a sudden have great pastoral value and help you to, and it has pastoral value even for the person to understand themselves, for us to understand and have patience with one another, to love one another and share the grace of Christ with one another, the life-saving gospel that says, I love you, go and sin no more, right? And
Right.
being able to do both of those things at the same time is hard.
But also recognizing they're going to sin again.
Yeah,
Right?
right.
I mean, that's like that's this whole cycle. We can't escape it, and so I'll probably go a lot farther in trying to associate with and love and serve
Right.
people in the LGBT community than a lot of people, because I get the historical
Right.
part. Like, I don't know how to wrestle with it. It's complicated, and I don't want to just blow up people's lives just because
Right.
they're dealing with a sin that's not like mine,
Right.
that's popular to hate on
Right.
by people.
If I may go back to that story, because I think that little anecdote is just powerful, and in
Yep.
that point that you raised just needs just us to kind of go back, because I think someone on behalf of the church needs to say that we are part of the problem,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
The church, it's complicated, but we can acknowledge that has caused woundedness to people. And I think for that, I mean, I don't represent the church completely, but I want to acknowledge that. And if you've felt that, or that's your opinion, or you experienced that, I think all of us here want to first acknowledge that we believe that has happened, and really just want to say, if the church has, in a way, maybe missed the mark of,
Yeah.
of
In a
really.
way.
To put it lightly.
I was going to use another word.
Mistaken of a
I was
citrate, but yeah, there you
Because,
go.
I mean, I can even use the more strong word of if
Sin.
we have failed you, just really sincerely, we want to say we're so sorry. So anyone who's listening, maybe this was something personally you experienced, or your loved one, or you just have friends who have been hurt by the church, because there were moments where there were certain individuals who they handled it in the ways that did inflict pain. We want to let you know that John Paul II just was used as an instrument to tell us the gospel. It's the same thing. It's like John Paul II didn't create a new thing.
Right.
This is God's revelation
Yeah.
to us. It's just in the language. You know how, like, God, if we just think of salvation history, it took many, many years, days, seconds, minutes for salvation history to unfold,
Mhm.
because God is meeting us where we are.
Yeah.
And humanity could not stomach Jesus. You know what I mean? that love, that unconditional, that powerful, overflowing love, loving you no matter what, right? Just can't. So it takes time. And I think Theology of the Body is an example of God's providence, but really his tenderness, his gentleness of, I know your heart, historical man and woman. I know how messed up you are at this point in 2021. So let me give you new language. let me give you new language so you can understand my story, which is the gospel. And this is why we're talking about it in this new language, so it can pierce the heart, and we can be receptive to it, because there's such woundedness when it comes to Christianity that we're just going to put our walls up, and we're ready to fight at this point, right? But that means there's division. So before I go on that tangent, I just want to go back to the fact that woman's story of why she no longer goes to church. That hurts my heart, and I know it hurts our heart.
And I'm sure she's not the only one.
Right.
That's right.
And that's why we're here. That's why we're here to talk about this theology, because unfortunately, people within the church have misconstrued the message and our pastoral approach, and kind of how what do we do when we have individuals either having that type of attraction or what have you. It can be any problem. It could be a marital problem, etc. It could be pornography addiction. I mean, it just...
Yeah, we don't want to pick on one.
Right. It's those are hard conversations to have, and we've dropped the ball many a time. So definitely want to acknowledge that today. But that's not where we're leaving it, right? If we wanted to just leave it and go home because we're just giving up, we wouldn't be here on this podcast talking about theology of the body.
Yeah.
I mean, we're saying yes, no, there is a new way of, there is a theology. There is, and it's not, let's not just keep it a theology too,
Like
to make it
abstract.
an intellectual thing. Like, this stuff is real. The rubber meets the road. This applies to you, and the church, the way maybe we think what the church is saying on these very touchy subjects, and we feel like the church doesn't understand, and she's just so archaic and old. She just needs to get with it, right?
Yeah.
We're here to say, like, no, she can speak to your heart.
She can speak to it.
No matter what has happened. So.
I'd like to just, one point about that is, I mean, we're on the Catholic side here, right? And so, and right now, I mean, it's for all kinds of reasons. Our shame is in the paper, right? Our, like,
splattered.
like
all over.
our shame, like, that's kind of the experience of being a Catholic right now, in a lot of ways, right? Is that and it's, and I think without justifying it, it can be understandable that the reaction of many Catholics would be to defend or protect or to hide or to lash back out against that, right?
Just be honest.
I mean, that's what happens when you feel, when my shame is exposed, it's an understandable reaction that I would push back or I would try to fight back, right?
It's part of your identity, if it's
Yeah.
your tribe, yeah.
That's right. And so a lot of Catholics, a lot of experience of Catholics, my friends, myself, in a lot of ways, you would go through this period of trying to defend the church and then get tired of defending the church and then you want to throw the church in the trash. I mean, that whole thing is all about, that's all shame at work. And what's happening in the case of this experience, and not at all to justify it, but we also can't have an expectation that the pastor on the other side of the desk himself doesn't experience shame, himself is someone who wants to hide and wants to protect and wants to not expose the weaknesses, and so would respond in a shameful way.
Right.
And
Right.
that does not at all to justify how that person acted, but we also need to
He's
be
demonstrating his own historical man.
He's
in that
a
moment,
historical man
Right.
too,
Right.
and
Yeah.
it's and what I find that I really want to emphasize here is that there is no country, there's no denomination, there's no church, there's no group of people who've got it right.
Yeah.
And the other people who don't. Like,
Wrong.
that doesn't exist. That's
And
just not how it is. And so if you go and speak to a priest at a parish about something, you're going to talk to a sinful man.
Mhm.
That is what's going, and you're going to encounter
That's me.
You're going to encounter his
Not a priest,
shame.
but
You're going to encounter his shame too. And the Christian charity isn't to be like, become, the hope isn't that we get ourselves into some pure state so that we can then encounter. What happens is my shame has to encounter your shame, and together we have to love one another in the intimacy of our relationship, and to be transparent about who we are and where we are and what we struggle with, so that as brothers, this is what happens in recovery groups, as brothers, the sinner and the sinner can lean on each other and be encouraged. And when that doesn't happen in the church, when there is like the authority pure person and the broken sinful person, when that's going on, you end up in this kind of shameful situation that
well,
is
when the sinner leans
everywhere.
on the sinner, the historical man leans on the historical man, you actually then get to see the eschatological man.
That's right.
So we
Right,
we
like-
gotta,
That's exactly right.
we
That's
gotta
exactly
shift
right.
from the shame-based ministry approach, which we've been doing forever, to a compassion-based ministry approach where we recognize our own sinfulness our own woundedness as we reach out to those wounded people. I'm thinking of like The Wounded Healer by Henry Nouwen, something like that.
Yeah.
The same concept that we as pastors and